The Philadelphia 76ers 106-92 without their best player Joel Embiid, who's sidelined at least the first two games with an orbital fracture. Tobias Harris led the Sixers 27 points, while James Harden finished with 16 points on 5 of 13 shooting, running his streak of being held under 25 points to 11 straight playoff games. His longest since he was coming off the bench for the Oklahoma City Thunder to start his career. Tyler Hero finished with a team-high 25 for Miami. Bam Adebayo added 24 points, 12 rebounds. James Harden, though, fellas, he's staying optimistic.
It's one game, but things can turn fast. So, the sooner we can correct the things that we can control, the better off we'll be. Obviously, we're missing Joe, but, it's out of our control, and we got to go out there and man up and be great. And I know we will do because we've been resilient, so far.
JJ Redick up first. Do you expect more from Harden without Embiid?
I don't know why we would expect more from Harden. He's shown over the last year and change that this is the player he is. But at this point of his career, he's a facilitator, he's a playmaker, but he is not the volume scorer that we saw in Houston. And to me, the adjustment is not for James to look to score more. They had a lot of success when they went small and they attacked. They couldn't buy a three-point bucket. And they also had a lot of success when they went to that zone. 23 possessions in zone last night, 0.65 points per possession. The 71 possessions in half court and man, Miami scored 1.13 points per possession. So to me, this is more about let's adjust the lineup a little bit. DeAndre Jordan, as much as I love him, a dear friend, at this point, I don't think he should be starting in a playoff game. Start Paul Reed, and then at times go small with Tobias Harris and George Niang out on the court. Spread them out. Give Harden space, give Maxey space, give Tobias Harris space, and shoot threes.
That's such a breath of fresh air. I've been saying it for 6 weeks, and I don't know why people are having such a hard time, JJ, like buying into, I guess this is just what it's going to be. You look at James Harden over the last 6 weeks, but really focus in on the last month. Mm-hmm. James Harden hasn't had one game in which he had the same number of points as his career playoff average, which was 23 points a game. Not once in 13 straight games. He doesn't win that matchup that's in front of him anymore to the extent that he did. Now, those guys ride his hip a little longer. Even guys like P.J. Tucker, who's a great defender. P.J. Tucker is not a laterally quick guy. He's a strong guy. So when James Harden gets a switch like he did last night with P.J. Tucker on him, 28, 30 feet from the basket, 3 years ago, that's a back and forth 6 times, go to your left hand, and that guy's in your rearview mirror. And now it's let me get into the paint and now wreak havoc with my passing or my scoring ability. He didn't win that matchup. He didn't win matchups last night when he got switches with Strus on him, with Bam Adebayo at 30 feet from the basket. His inability to beat that guy, to me, that's all predicating now why James Harden looks the way he does. And that's not going to change night to night, especially without Embiid, because Miami's got guys sitting in his lap. They're just waiting. They're daring Danny Green and Niang and Korkmaz. Go ahead. Can you guys make shots to beat us? If so, we'll adjust to that. Last night, to JJ's point, 6 for 34 from the three. You're not helping James Harden at all if you're not making shots as role players. But it all gets back to the same point. Physically, he is just not the same. He does not have the burst to win that matchup that's in front of him that set up his entire game. And those step-back threes aren't going in as frequently either because not as much lift, more contested. Yeah. And he's an inefficient player right now offensively, and people just want him to go get 35 because that's who James Harden is. It's not there right now.
I want to come back to that in a minute, but I want to hear from you.
Both of you guys were deadly shooters when you played. There's no question about it. And you had to have certain guys do certain things for you to be able to get your shots up. But could it be such, and we watched James Harden in the closeout game last series that he was in, he looked pretty good to me. But could it be more Doc Rivers in what he's asking him to do and less James Harden? Because if you go back last year, but prior to him in and out of the lineup in Brooklyn, he was cooking with Mike D'Antoni on the sideline. So I'm looking at it, and when you go back to Houston, I heard you mention it, JJ, that he hasn't been the same guy since probably his Houston days. Well, who was on the bench coaching him in Houston when he was really cooking like that? It was Mike D'Antoni. So is this more Doc Rivers' system in the situation in which he want to play? You also mentioned DeAndre Jordan. We love him. There's no question about it. But the lineup, the way he is rotating guys, the way he's mixing things up, if he decided to go small and do some of the things that we saw him do in Houston or early in Brooklyn, could this be a difference for James Harden in Philadelphia?
One thing I just want to ask you quickly, and then we'll get back to the game in this series, because when you brought up him losing a step. Now, obviously, I'm not going to say, was this trade a mistake? Because we saw how it ended on the Ben Simmons side of things. But do you think it's the right move to assign him to a long-term extension? He's the right fit there in Philly now that we're seeing how this plays out when he needs to step up.
I'd have a tough time, but that's not the way the NBA works, unfortunately. He's going to get his money. And, you know, would I feel comfortable giving him $200+ million going into the deal, JJ, the way he looks right now? I mean, that's a very difficult thing to live with. Now, fortunately for Philly, he's not their best player. You know, if he was the best player, then absolutely not. You can't do it. He's not. Joel Embiid is. So you're hoping James Harden can be a good enough version of who he is at this stage of his career. People in Philadelphia, believe me, are debating this on a daily basis because I'm listening to it every single day when I'm down there. And a lot of people now are falling on the side of, based on the way he looks right now, how could you possibly commit that kind of money to him? I always say this, what's your alternative solution then? Because you have to have something to come in there that's better than this.
Yep.
And that's, listen, this is above my pay grade, JJ. That's why Daryl Morey gets paid a lot of money to have to make that decision. But I think the way the NBA works typically, they're going to give him the money. They went through all this to get him, right? They're going to make that offer.
I totally agree with you. I would expect him to re-sign in Philly on a long-term deal. Maybe it's not that 5-year, 250 supermax extension that he's eligible for, but he's going to sign a long deal and he's going to get paid a lot of money. To Keyshawn's point, you know, I said, Keyshawn, you know, for the last year and change, and really to me, we saw him play great basketball, MVP level basketball prior to his hamstring injury. To Tim's point, he has not looked the same since that injury. He does lack that burst. So it's not a matter of Doc Rivers' system. To me, I can just watch the game. He is struggling to get by guys. His blow-by rate is basically cut by 2.5 right now. He's struggling to get by guys. And the other word that Legs used that I thought was just the perfect encapsulation is inefficiency. Like, he's not an inefficient playmaker. He's not an inefficient facilitator, but he is an inefficient scorer. He struggles to make twos. He can't make a floater right now, and those step-back threes aren't going in.
But when you say struggling to blow by guys, why? Because of the hamstring injury?
Well, let's acknowledge the fact that, he's 13 years in the league. He's got a ton of miles on his body. He's had deep playoff runs. And a lot has been asked of him in his career, especially once he left OKC. He's had the ball in his hands a lot.
Yeah.
There's a metric that, you know, we're tracked every single game, every single play. There's cameras all over the arena. There's a top speed metric. It's one of the things they measure: average speed, top speed. You know, James Harden, when he was in Houston, his top speed in a given game, a given year, was somewhere between 18.5 and 19 miles per hour. And over the last year and a half, that top speed is now 16 miles per hour. So, yeah, maybe it is he's lost a little bit of that burst.
I just got to say one thing, because I sat on this show when this trade happened, and people were saying this might be the most dynamic duo ever. And obviously he doesn't have Joel Embiid, so it's not fair to fully judge it. But this is not the most dynamic duo. This is not what we were expecting to see when this blockbuster trade happened. But tell me this, the Sixers were leading at the half. What changed?
For me, it was Miami just at halftime. I think Eric Spoelstra, I'd love to have been in there to hear what he had to say to his team, because I thought second quarter, they were not playing very physically defensively. They were not committing the extra energy they had to against a team shorthanded like this. You saw that in the third quarter. And then Tyler Hero came in, his offense kind of separated the two teams. But for me, it was really just a focus on the part of Miami to dig in and dive in. And I think James Harden got a little bit tired. He took 4 shots in the second half because he's not capable of carrying that burden. I saw him last night pick the ball up off a ball screen where no one really jumped out on him. He had space, and he just picked it up and threw a cross-court pass that was intercepted. You know what that is? That's fatigue. That's mental and physical fatigue. And it's knowing, I don't really know how to do this right now. Like, I can't go get people. I heard people say, he needed to take 25 shots. Well, no, to JJ's point. So he was 5 for 13. Do you know what 25 shots would have looked like?
Yeah.
It would have looked like 9 for 25. That's what it would have looked like. And he knows that. And so as a result, he's trying to balance playmaking and scoring. The problem is right now, without Embiid, they don't have other guys on the roster except for probably Maxey. And I said going into the game last night, if we're talking about James Harden first,
You did.
I said that's a bad sign if he's the headline.
You said we have to be talking about Maxey.
If Maxey's the headline, it's a great sign, because the only reason Maxey would be the headline is because he went for 35, played out of his mind, and helped them maybe get a win or at least hang tight late.
Yeah.
We didn't. We talked about James Harden first, which meant he didn't play well. And that's a really bad sign for the Sixers because they just don't have that kind of depth to make up for that. So 25 shots isn't the answer because, like to JJ's point, they're not going to be quality shots. They're not going to be efficient shots. He knows it. It's a bad space right now for James Harden to try to figure this out without Joel Embiid.
Key, is this over?
I think when you look at it, the Sixers, you can surely see how much they miss their potential MVP by not being in the lineup. You talked about Maxey. Maxey can get his shots off and do certain things with Embiid on the floor, but maybe that's not the case with James Harden. And from the way I look at it, this thing could be over in 5 if Embiid doesn't hurry up and get back.
You guys think it's over?
Yeah, definitely. They don't win a game in this series that Embiid doesn't play. So, you're talking about you lose 2?
Yeah.
All right, you say, okay, well, now we're going home. But the problem is now you're talking about beating the number 1 seed 4 out of 5 times. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, they're going to have a hard time winning this series without Joel being back for at least Game 3.
Sounds like you're keeping a little hope alive, though. A smidge?
It's sports. Anything can
Okay,
happen.
yeah. Okay.
But do I think I said this before the series. I think even with Joel Embiid, I think this is a bad matchup for Philly, and Miami's the better team.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's get to the other one in the East. Boston didn't defend home court in Game 1 versus Giannis and the Bucks, struggling on offense.